When you say that now is not the time to talk because they've done nuclear tests and they're testing missiles, can we take it that if they were to suspend that behavior, that the United States would then be open to dialogue with the North Koreans?
Well, I'm not going to state what our expectations will be at this point. At this point, okay, they are clearly not ready to sit down and talk, okay? Clearly not ready to do so, and I've said the same thing here for months and months, so I'm not going to go back and repeat that once again.
I just wanted to follow up on some of the contradictions from the weekend. In his press avail, the secretary said, when envisioning the idea of talks, he said the first conversation is around what do you want to talk about. Later, you tweeted that diplomatic channels are open for Kim Jong-un now. They won't be open forever.
Mm-hmm.
Then the White House spokeswoman said, we've been clear, now is not the time to talk, and the only conversations would be around Americans who have been detained. Now is not the time to have any other conversations. So
that is the same thing. When Sarah Sanders said now is not the time to have conversations, that is the same thing that you have heard me say. That is the same thing that you've heard Secretary Tillerson, Susan Thornton, and others in this administration say. Now is clearly not the time to talk. When they are engaged in ballistic missile testing, when they're engaged in other types of testing, they are sending us a very clear example, a very clear sign that they are nowhere ready to talk yet.
So, but when the secretary said that he wants to have a conversation with the North Koreans about what do you want to talk about, he's not actually saying that he wants to have that conversation now. He's just speaking in the hypothetical terms.
And that is consistent with what he has said in the past and what we've always said. I mean, yes, at some point, of course, we would like to sit down and talk with North Korea, but now is not the time to do so. They're doing too many horrible activities to folks in the region and people around the world. This is another example where I say, you know, the entire world agrees with us. The entire civilized world agrees with us that the DPRK, that Kim Jong-un's activities and actions are horrific. They're destabilizing. They frighten their neighbors and they frighten the world.
One more question. One more question. So when he says,
Michelle, to your point, when they're shooting off weapons, when they're launching weapons, and they're doing this kind of testing, they are not ready to talk. What country would reward them with a conversation when they're engaged in those kinds of activities? We certainly wouldn't.
but when he said in that press avail, "Stay tuned," you know that the U.S. is probing.
Yeah.
I mean, that was sort of interpreted as
Well,
a
that's the
somewhat
thing.
hopeful comment. He's saying stay tuned, so we should not interpret that as to stay tuned. There might be something coming down the
I
pipe.
think you all are trying to, and I'm not assigning blame here, but trying to pick apart the word choice entirely too much. Our message hasn't changed. The policy hasn't changed. We believe that the sanctions are starting to have an impact. It's slow. It's not an overnight thing. We've talked about that a lot before. But the sanctions, and we've ratcheted up the pressure, are starting to have an impact. We had some news come out earlier this week that Italy decided to, I believe it was, kick out North Korea's ambassador. The Vatican has indicated that they wouldn't accept the credentials of the person who was set to become the incoming ambassador to the Vatican. Malaysia, we had some news late last week about the same thing. All of that is starting to have an effect. They're not huge things in each one, but all added up, they're starting to have an impact, and that's going to take some time. And I think when the Secretary talks about signals, signs, probing, we're trying to watch to see what the reaction is going to be. Is less money going into North Korea? Yes, we know that. We know that it's having what we would view as a positive impact, because the less money that goes in, the less money they're able to use for their nuclear ballistic missile testing.
And then just the last question.
Yeah.
You also tweeted DPRK will not obtain a nuclear capability. Is it the U.S. belief now that North Korea does not have a nuclear capability?
So I think we have been clear all along, and as some of you have probably noticed, tweeting only allows 140 characters. So you can't always explain everything in as great of detail as perhaps you would like. And many folks were only too happy to have fun with me on that one. But we've made it abundantly clear that we will not allow the regime to gain international legitimacy that it tries to seek through its unlawful nuclear and nuclear weapons programs. Look, they want to be acknowledged as a nuclear state. That gives them a whole lot of prestige. We try not to give them that prestige that they want, okay? We're trying not to do that, but it's clear, and this message hasn't changed. You've heard me say it a million times. We will not accept a nuclearized North Korea. We will not accept it as a nuclear armed state. We remain firm in our opposition to their pursuit of nuclear and ballistic missile weapons.
So are you saying then that Twitter hasn't upgraded you to the 280?
They haven't updated me to the 280.
And then following on that, does that mean that you think that 140 character tweets are perhaps not the best way to convey foreign policy messages?
Matt, I'm not
not just
gonna touch that
not
one.
just from the spokeswoman of the State Department, but maybe from people who hold elective office.
I'm not going to touch that one. Thank you. Okay. Anything else on North Korea today? Yeah.
In these diplomatic channels where the United States has discussed the 3 Americans still detained in North Korea, do these diplomatic channels, have they provided access for the protecting power there? Have they been productive? And have the conversation strayed beyond the 3 Americans detained there?
So the answer to your question, we spoke to North Korea regarding Otto Warmbier's case. And that's a productive channel. We still have 3 Americans who are being held in North Korea. We don't have a diplomatic presence there. We have to rely upon the Swedish government. They've been tremendous in terms of their assistance to us. That channel does exist. That's certainly not something that we would keep a secret. We will continue to maintain that channel, especially as it pertains to getting information about our Americans being held there.
Has it been productive and have discussions moved
Well,
beyond?
I think it's been productive in that, A, we know we have a line to them if we would have the ability to have a new conversation, a fresh conversation about our Americans. They also know that they have a line to us. But I want to be clear, we're not engaged in any talks beyond Americans being held there. Now is not the time to have a talk with North Korea. I've said that all along. The Secretary has said that all along. Our experts here have said that along, and that's been echoed by the White House.
Afghanistan?
So we were
Let's one more thing in Afghanistan. Hi.
So we were told those channels are for humanitarian purpose.
Yes.
When was the last time it was used? Was that after Otto Warmbier's release?
I'm not sure. I would imagine that were the case, but I'd just have to check. I just don't know offhand. Okay. And some of those would be diplomatic conversations as well, which we wouldn't divulge.
Are they all in New York?
I don't know. We do some of that out of New York, yes. But beyond that, I'm not aware.
As U.S. President Donald Trump prepares for his upcoming visit to Asia, including China, and as Secretary of State Rex Tillerson has just returned from Beijing to talk about North Korea, VOA Mandarin reporter Peggy Chong spoke with Republican U.S. Congressman Peter Roskam of Illinois. He is co-chair of Congressional Caucus on Korea and shares his views on China's role with respect to the North Korean nuclear crisis.
China has a decision to make because China has a series of unpleasant things upon it. And for right now, China has been a defender of the status quo. China has is only too happy to see the North Korean regime oppress its people and do all these terrible things because China craves stability on the Korean peninsula. But here's what is likely to happen. China doesn't want a unified Korean peninsula, with an American ally right on its borders. China doesn't want a war either, I'm sure. And China doesn't want a collapsing North Korean regime because a collapsing regime means one thing: millions of refugees who are going to flood into China. So China also has the most influence here because China has an incredibly strong and close relationship with North Korea. Said another way, economically, North Korea cannot survive without China. And so China needs to make a decision here, and that is to step forward and to take responsibility because the United States is not and cannot allow North Korea continue on this provocative action for the livelihood of the United States. And this has now become a threat of great significance, threatening Guam and so forth, threatening our allies in ways that are provocative and incredibly incendiary. And so China's got to make a decision, because the notion of just things staying as they are, things aren't going to stay as they are. And so diplomacy is one thing, but the economic power of the Chinese in this case, I think, can carry the day. But they've got to make a decision about moving forward.
What can the U.S. do to pressure China to take more actions on this?
Well, the Chinese have had a lot of influence, and they've done a lot of business in the United States. And, we've welcomed that by and large. But we've got to be looking now at Chinese banks in particular, the ones that have been, over the past decade have been involved so very, very much in the United States. And we've got to make sure that we're looking at all of our options on the table. Should sanctions be extended to those types of enterprises that are complicit with the North Korean regime? We were successful in driving the Iranians, for example, to the table through a series of sanctions efforts. Sanctions are cumulative, and it's not all one fix. You've got to go after it one way and then go after it another way, and I think it's time for us to up the wattage, so to speak, in terms of the sanctions regime and look at those who are being complicit in enabling North Korea to be so provocative to the United States and to our allies.
As the co-chair of Congressional Caucus in Korea, what kind of relationship do you hope to see U.S. and Korea has? And also, what kind of role do you think the U.S. should play in that region?
Well, the U.S. is there, and we've had historically, the United States is a Pacific power, and the region in particular, the relationship between the United States and Korea is one that has gone back decades. And, 60 years now, we're after the Korean War, where the world responded to North Korean provocation and led by the United States and the UN effort there. And Korea is now an incredible success story. Korea went from being a donor or a recipient nation just completely broken and on its knees, and now it's the 10th largest economy in the world. And it has an incredibly strong military, and we need to continue this relationship of stability in the region. And so South Korea in particular, and the United States historically have had a strong relationship. That relationship needs to be maintained, not just from a military point of view, but particularly from a trade and a commercial point of view, and to realize in many ways that our fates are joined. And for us to recognize that this strong alliance is something that cannot be overemphasized right now.